Hi, my name is Blair Lewis, and this is my presentation for Tort Law. I got the definition just straight up from the resources that were given to us. Tort liability just concerns civil wrongs and addresses the duty, breach, and injury sustained to one individual as a result of another's conduct. Basically, it's saying that your actions or inactions have caused some type of injury or harm to somebody else, and that you are liable or responsible for it. The first court case I picked was a teacher went up to a student and was telling them that they needed to leave the classroom because they were being disruptive during some type of spelling test. The kids stood up and the teacher attempted to physically remove the student by grabbing their arm, and the student somehow either pushed the teacher back or tried to have some type of altercation with the student, and the student ended up falling and hitting the teacher's pedestal and being injured. Unfortunately, I just don't think it's ever okay to put your hands on a student no matter what the situation is, even if two students are fighting each other. We've always been taught in my district to call security, call for help, get the teacher next door, anything besides you physically getting yourself involved. And then also on the other side, not being negligent and letting people become injured by fighting or putting their hands on each other. So it's definitely a fine line, but just I feel like to be proactive, you just don't put your hands on a kid ever. There's just almost no reason that you would need to do that. And it's going to think about loading here for a second. Maybe. Well, we shall see. There we go. Okay. The second case that I picked was a student in a PE class who suffered a compound fracture from jumping on a springboard, which I'm assuming was under or around a basketball goal, jumping on the springboard, trying to dunk a basketball. And he fell and somehow got a compound fracture in his leg. Meaning the bone came, not that really matters, the bone came out of the skin. So this one was a tricky one because the kid did ask permission to jump on the springboard, but it was still his choice. The teacher didn't make him do it. The kid just did it of his own free will. So I feel like that was a really tricky one because, yes, you should not allow the students to engage in the behavior that could harm them, but you can't account for every single possible problem that could happen. I probably wouldn't have let a kid jump on a springboard trying to dunk a basketball just because I'd be afraid that their feet would come out from under them and they'd fall on their butt. But that's kind of that common sense piece of tort law. But it's just in the moment I could see how a teacher would just think it was fun and not be proactive about thinking of the consequences, which I'm sure is exactly what that teacher did and why this happened. The next court case that I picked was a student pushing another student in a locker room, and that student then hit their head on the locker and also somehow hit their side and had to have their spleen removed. The teacher was then sued for negligence because he wasn't in the locker room at the time, and normally he was there supervising, but the kids had been super rowdy that day, so he was busy talking to another kid and somehow just didn't get into the locker room in time to supervise. He actually was found liable for that situation because since the kids were extra rowdy that day, he should have known to then go supervise the locker room. And we've always just had the rules that the locker rooms are never unattended. Not only with fights, but with kids stealing things from each other and bullying and everything. The locker rooms are always one of the most high crime areas for things that could go wrong in a school. Then another court case that I picked was actually really extreme, but in June 2016, this 7th grade boy somehow drowned at his school-sponsored swim party, and I guess there were staff on duty that were supposed to be like the lifeguards, but obviously they weren't like certified lifeguards, but they were certified in CPR. And somehow the kid ended up under the water for like 2 minutes before anybody like realized it, and then like another kid saw him and went to save him because none of the teachers would jump in to save him. And then once they got him out of the water, no one performed CPR on him until the paramedics got there, and the kid ended up passing away from his injuries. So I feel like that was just completely mishandled. I can't imagine even being in that situation, but I don't know how nobody thought to like have normal, legitimate lifeguards on duty, and how that all those things that could go wrong with having, especially in a pool, like, oh my goodness, there's so many things that can go wrong. They need to have some type of waiver to where parents know that the teachers are going to be the lifeguards supervising, and if they're not okay with that, they need to be there to watch their child. Also, just being reactive. They weren't even reactive. Not only were they not proactive, they weren't reactive. They didn't use any action necessary to save the child. They just, like, I'm sure they all froze and didn't know what to do, but oh my gosh, the last thing I would do is do nothing in that situation. Oh, I can't. That one was a bad one. So I just think whenever you're having some type of an event or you're going on a field trip, like, you have to be devil's advocate and think of any possible thing that can go wrong. And they definitely did not do that. And it cost them a lot of money, but not only that, it cost them a child's life, which I think they would all agree is not even in comparison to the money, because that was just a huge oversight and a mistake. Then the last court case that I picked was a student that actually fell off a bleacher because there was no guardrail, and this student had cerebral palsy and was in a wheelchair and suffered serious injuries, had to have surgery on his femur because he broke it, and the student was already mentally disabled, and the accident then caused him to have severe anxiety problems with going back to the building and going back to school. So he had to have a counselor with him constantly, a one-on-one counselor always, because he would get panic attacks just by being at the school. Again, I think this is kind of similar, not as extreme as the no lifeguarding incident last, but just if you see an item or an object in your school that is broken or is not properly maintained, like, it is your job to tell somebody. Like, you have to get the word out or not allow it to be used if it's a danger to anybody. And I'm sure, again, it was one of those, well, everyone sees that the rail is not there. Well, then let's not put a child in a wheelchair right next to the edge. Like, I don't understand how things like that happen. But I'm sure that's not even the worst of the things that I could have found. Reacting, I think they did do a pretty good job. They called 911, they got him medical attention. But just like removing students from the situation, if it's like an assembly of some sort, just being proactive and doing what you need to do is just the only way to get around stuff like that. So this definitely taught me a lot, and I've learned that sometimes common sense isn't always known by everybody, and these are things that you need to like talk with your staff about and talk with people about, just to make sure these things never happen. Like, it's not just making a bad call or not doing something that you should do. Like, these are kids' lives that are seriously injured or hurt for the rest of their lives. Like, I read some that were really bad with brain injuries, and these kids were like permanently disabled because of it, and it's just like equipment failure that could have easily been prevented, and that's why these districts are getting sued. And I think if maybe there's more conversation and more people advocating on the behalf of what's best for kids, then it could be solved. But that's all I have. So see you next time. Bye.